Henry Armstrong, in my opinion, is the second greatest boxer of all time. Teddy Atlas has him at the number one spot. Compiling over 180 professional fights and scoring over 100 knockouts, Armstrong was one of the first successful world champions through multiple weight divisions. And despite standing at only 5'5" and normally being outweighed by his bigger opponents, he never took a backward step and never stopped throwing. Having been in his prime in the 1930s, Armstrong was using inside tricks that are just decades ahead of his time. In my opinion, along with Roberto Duran, he's the greatest inside fighter ever seen. And his accomplishments are just out of this world. No fighter has replicated what Armstrong was able to do. To understand fully how great his achievements were, you have to delve into how boxing was back in those days. In comparison to nowadays, where there's well over a dozen weight divisions, back in Armstrong's day there were only 8 weight divisions and only one world champion in each of those divisions. Armstrong won world titles across 3 of those weight classes, but what makes this achievement even more outstanding is that he held them simultaneously and defended the belts at the same time. He defeated Hall of Famers across featherweight, lightweight and welterweight, snapping up all 3 of those world titles, and even moved up to challenge for the middleweight world title against Seferino Garcia, a man he'd already defeated. Many at ringside thought that Armstrong done more than enough to win that fight and was robbed from winning his 4th world title in as many weight divisions. And to put that in today's context, it would be similar as to fighting across 7 different weight divisions. That's only been eclipsed by Manny Pacquiao. However, Armstrong was moving up and down and defending these belts simultaneously. And he was fighting so consistently that he was breaking records that stand to this day. Across that time, he made 19 successful welterweight title defences. Now let's take a closer look at the style and tricks he was able to implement in order to dominate in such brutal fashion. Now, as previously stated, he was usually at a size disadvantage, which means he had to use subtle and constant head movement to get in. Armstrong was constantly bobbing and weaving, and once he was in, he would never stop throwing shots. He would spring into range with a leaping jab, but what made him so difficult to hit was he was very elusive after he threw, always moving his head and making his opponents miss. This instinctive defence, along with his constant aggression, would keep his opponents under pressure, and it allowed him to get into range and unload his devastating work without taking any damage. And once he was up close, he would use his smaller frame as an advantage, making himself a much smaller target and getting underneath his opponents, putting his head against their chin, which would make his base a lot stronger and put his opponents in a more vulnerable position. And being this close to your opponent when you're smaller than them works to your advantage, because you're smothering their work and wearing them out. And Armstrong's shorter arms were much more suited to fighting up close, so he was able to chip away at his opponents when they couldn't really do much damage to him. And it was his never-ending endurance that was seriously helping with this style, as he was just capable of keeping this pace up for the entire fight. But as I've already stated, it's his defensive movements up close that are extremely instinctive that make this style work so well. It would be impossible to achieve the success he had in as many fights if he was taking damage up close consistently. But he was a master of taking the sting out of shots and making them miss completely. He truly is one of the most phenomenal, exciting and dominant fighters ever seen. He would eventually retire with a professional record of 152 wins to 22 defeats, 9 draws and 100 knockouts. Nearly a century later, his 19 title defences at welterweight is still a record, and his achievements have seen him become one of the most legendary boxers of all time.